Hey everyone, this is Aaron from MTGChallengers and welcome to another Magic the Gathering deck tech. Today we'll be going over our take on Mono Green Devotion. So this has been a deck that I believe has stood the test of time very well. It's been a top performer ever since Theros Standard, and I don't see that changing at all here. The main focus here is to just ramp up, create a ton of mana, and dump all that into late game mana sinks with your creatures and the one spell in the deck. So let's begin by going over the creature base, which is the bulk of the deck. 4 Elvish Mystic is a staple for many green decks, this one in particular. If you're looking to ramp up as fast as possible, nothing beats 2 mana on turn 1. It keeps you ahead of your opponent in terms of your curve, lets you get out Courser of Kruphix on turn 2, and just generally accelerates you along to your big win conditions. Similarly, we have a playset of Sylvan Caryatid. The fixing isn't important at all since this is a monocolored deck, so being able to tap for any color is not important. It just lets you get out more mana out there to be able to pump into your bigger creatures. The 3 toughness also makes it a great blocker up against aggro. Their game plan is just to get you to 0 life and to overextend as much as possible before you get your mana up there, and just one good blocker can really slow them down, and in the mid to late game, aggro just fails against this deck. And for the final mana dork, we have Voyaging Satyr as a 3-of. Very, very good for this deck in particular. The vast majority of this deck is forests, so normally he's just a functional Elvish Mystic, but he can also be used to untap Nykthos when we get it out there, and then things just get bonkers. I've seen people add 20, 30 mana and up with the interaction between those 2 cards, which is exactly what this deck wants. Also, being able to physically untap a land instead of directly adding the mana to the pool has one pretty cool advantage in this deck, that being its interaction with Nissa. You can tap out to cast her, and then make one of the lands a 4/4 creature, and then untap it with the Satyr to be able to swing in with it. Now we start to move on to the harder hitting creatures with 3 copies of Genesis Hydra. One of the big mana sinks I was discussing previously. This deck absolutely loves spells and abilities with X in the mana cost, as you can imagine, and Genesis Hydra is a very good one. It helps you sort of mill into your win conditions, and get a huge creature with X +1/+1 counters on it in the process. The best part about it is that the trigger happens when you cast it, not when it enters the battlefield, so even if they counter it with a Disdainful Stroke or Dissipate or something, you do still get to reveal the cards and pick out something probably just as good, if not better. Next, we have another mana-related creature, Courser of Kruphix. An automatic 4-of in pretty much any green mid-range deck. Just helps you hit all of your land drops. It gets you information from your deck by letting you look at the top card, which can be very important since we aren't running any Scry lands or anything in this deck. It gains you a good bit of life over the course of a game, which can be important up against aggressive decks, and the 4 toughness keeps it out of range of Lightning Strike and Anger of the Gods, which can be very important against mid-range decks like Timur or up against Burn. Next up, we have 1 Nylea, God of the Hunt. Another really great mana sink in the late game. You can swing Alpha, use Nykthos, and just pump something up tremendously, and usually win the game. She herself will almost always be a creature due to all the devotion, and giving a monstrous Polukranos or Arbor Colossus trample can be a lethal blow to your opponent. Only a 1-of since she's not absolutely necessary to win the game normally, and when she is, we can fetch her with Chord of Calling, which we'll talk about in a minute. Then we have arguably the quintessential green creature, Polukranos World Eater. Another automatic playset. A 5/5 for 4 mana is very, very good in its own right, and his monstrous ability is just an amazing sink for all your mana in the late game. Not only does it make him massive, but it lets you knock out any little blockers so that you can push through those final points of damage, which of course is very beneficial since he doesn't have trample. Particularly, his monstrous ability is one of the only ways we have of effectively dealing with Hornet Queen tokens from the opponent in the green mid-range mirror. He will die as a result since the tokens do damage to him, but it's usually worth the trade-off to knock them all out, and it's definitely superior to the alternative of trading 1-for-1 with my Arbor Colossus or something. Speaking of Arbor Colossus, he is another 4-of creature for mono green. Just a powerhouse of a creature for this particular deck. His cost really helps to get your devotion up there, and a 6/6 for 5 mana is just so much value. My favorite thing about him is his reach, and his monstrosity really just laughs at all of the big flyers like Butcher of the Horde and Stormbreath Dragon. A 9/9 Colossus at worst means that they're just going to end up chumping it and lose a creature every turn, and at best will cord up Nylea and give him trample, which is usually game over at that point. And finally, we have the main win condition of the deck, Hornet Queen, running 3 copies of her. Just a great finisher for the late game. It gets you 6 power in the air, and a lot of little death touch flyers to be able to trade with all of their big expensive ones. She's just incredibly hard to really deal with. Nothing beyond a Drown in Sorrow or Anger of the Gods can do it with any efficiency. Now we have the 1 spell in the deck, Chord of Calling, as a playset. This is really the glue that ties this particular build together. All the mana in the world isn't worth anything if you don't have anything to use it on, and that's where Chord of Calling comes in. If you aren't drawing anything, but because chances are you either have something or you have this. So if you do have this, it allows you to search up Polukranos, Nylea, Hornet Queen, or some other win condition / mana sink at instant speed, no less. So it's a great shenanigans spell to flash in a blocker or something like that, or to just do it at the end of their turn so it can swing in as soon as you untap. The final card I have in the main board, as well as the only Planeswalker in the deck, is Nissa, Worldwaker, 2 copies of her. A really awesome Planeswalker for mono green, especially with their 2/+1 abilities. Making a land a 4/4 creature with Trample is a great way to get some damage out there when you don't have much else on the field, and it also protects her really well. And she basically just costs 1 mana to cast if you use her other ability first, so you tap 5 lands to cast her, and then get to untap 4 of them to still cast a Polukranos or something. If nothing else, it's another mana engine, which is something this deck cannot have enough of. And her ultimate is really nice as well if you can get it off, since almost every single land in our mana base is a basic forest. And with that, we nicely transition to the discussion of our land base. Really quite simple. It's just 24 lands, 20 of which are basic forests, and the remaining 4 are Nykthos Shrines to Nyx. This card should really be self-explanatory at this point. It's what largely allows us to create all the insane amounts of mana that Polukranos, Genesis Hydra, and Nylea need to close the game out. So that's it for the main board. Let's take a look at the sideboard. First up, I have 2 Mistcutter Hydra. Great card up against really any deck running blue, dodges things like Disdainful Stroke, and pushes past creatures like Sirach Dragonclaw, Savage Knuckleblade, and Pearl Lake Ancient in the control matchup. Then I have 2 one-ofs that serve the same basic purpose. A 4th Genesis Hydra and a 2nd Nylea help out in the green mid-range mirror. They're likely going to be playing similar things, so upping the count of these cards helps to fight fire with fire. 3 Nylea's Disciple is great tech up against the aggressive decks. 3 Toughness makes it a pretty good blocker, and your Devotion to Green is usually very high in this deck. I've seen people cast this card and gain 10 life plus, which will basically cripple any aggressive deck. Next, I have a 4th Hornet Queen. Again, to fight fire with fire in the mirror, and also good against basically any deck that doesn't have significant power in the air. You can just fly over for 6 damage every turn. As long as they're not running Drown in Sorrow or Anger of the Gods, this card is amazing. 2 Scuttling Doom Engine is very, very good tech in the mirror, as well as against aggro and control decks. In the mirror and against aggro, because you can push past all their dorks and aggressive creatures, particularly things like Sylvan Caryatid, since it has a power of 0. And against control, as long as it resolves, even if they remove it, they will take the 6 damage, which is a pretty big punch. Next, I have 2 copies of Hunt the Hunter. Really the perfect card up against the mirror or any other green mid-range deck, since even if they're the same creature that you're trying to remove, it buffs yours up so it'll be able to triumph. Some extra removal definitely doesn't hurt in that situation. And finally, I have 3 Unravel the Aether. A really good enchantment removal against control. It gets rid of their Banishing Lights and Nyx Fleece Rams. In the mirror, it also hits Courser of Kruphix, which can be very important, and it does hit Jeskai Ascendancy as well, in case you're playing against any decks of that sort. So that's it for this deck tech. Be sure to check out our others. To see these decks in action, check out our gameplay videos. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the Facebook page and consider making a donation to support the continuation of this project. Thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content.